Welcome to the Business Leadership Discussion on the subject of interpersonal relationships. I need you and you need me. It's my delight today to introduce to you a good friend of mine for over 20 years, Dr. Marvin Brubacher. Marv has served as the Executive Director of MentorLink Canada for nearly 10 years. Prior to that, he was the first president of Heritage College and Seminary in Cambridge, Ontario. He's also served in numerous pastoral positions over the years. Marv has ministered both here in Canada and in 20 countries around the world. He and his wife, Kay, have 3 adult sons, 2 daughters-in-law, and 6 grandchildren. Marv has got a real heart for relationships and has learned tremendous experiences through the variety of roles that he's served in. So we welcome Marv to come and share with us now from God's Word and from his own personal business experience. God bless you, Marv.
So this is the topic for today. I need you and you need me, and we're going to give it our best shot. So here's a little introduction. I want to thank you for the privilege of sharing today. When Don asked me to do this, I thought, wow, what a topic. I have no idea where you start and end on this one. And so I just wanted to say right off, thank you, because I might forget at the end of the presentation to say that. And so where does one begin when you talk about something like this? This whole thing of interpersonal relationships, there are full books written on this. There's lots of articles. There's chapters in books, lots of scripture. And I'm supposed to give you an overview of this topic in 30 minutes. So that's the approach. I'm going to walk through my presentation. If you have a question or a comment, you can put it in the chat box and we'll deal with them at the end, or you can just wait to the end and we'll take them publicly. But there's 2 comments I want to make as we begin. One is, you are constantly developing a web of relationships, whether you realize it or not. I think many of us kind of go through life and don't realize how much our lives touch other people's lives and how much that can spread without our knowing. As Don introduced me, I've had the privilege of being in a number of different settings and living most of my life here in Southern Ontario, about 10, 12 years out of the country. And it's just amazing how many people I bump into, and it only takes a little conversation. We have a common person we know, and then I go like, oh my goodness, I hope they said nice things about me when they talked about me before, because here I am and they know me. So we're always building these relationships, and often we don't realize it. The second comment is, and this is directed towards leaders, this presentation, the strength of your leadership in any setting is based on the health of your relational web. And if you don't pay attention to this relational web, the strength of your leadership will be greatly impacted in a negative way. So here's a picture that I want to just get us going with, and you can unmute yourself. Tell me what you see when you see this picture. Obviously, some of you have played sports, and so when you have sports teams, you often start something like this. But what is actually happening here with respect to interpersonal relationships? Just unmute yourself and just say words or little sentences.
Team huddle, smiling, sort of a pep rally before a major task, executing a game plan.
Yeah.
Connectedness.
All right.
All in, all committed.
Yeah.
Nonverbal communication, eye contact, touching.
It's amazing. You see a picture like that and all kinds of things flow through your mind. Probably the biggest thing is this is a network of relationships. And right now it looks like they're all together, doesn't it? It looks like they're on the same page, either entering into some activity or actually celebrating the success of the activity. But we don't know what's going on in each person's life as they put their hands together. It looks good, but there may be feelings in that group that are unattended to. Have you ever thought about that? Some may actually be in competition with each other, in that competition for their value in sports teams, for playing minutes or whatever. There may be some brokenness in their life that they've not shared, but that's right there so there's feelings that are not reflected there. Everybody's smiling. You got the coach there, but there's a lot going on, and that's what networks and relationships are. The idea that I've based my presentation on is this idea of web networks, a network of webs based on the picture of a spider web. And I got the idea from a person who's my primary mentor presently, because my dad has passed away and some others that have passed away. But this gentleman's name is Glenn Taylor. And in a recent book that he wrote called Navigating Relationships for Life, I list some books at the end, and you'll get this presentation sent to you by Dawn later. But in his book, Navigating Relationships for Life, he says, life is about relationships. Our culture in North America is quite focused on the pursuit of independence, autonomy, self-actualization, and other personalized goals. In reality, these cannot be achieved without the involvement of others. So we have all these people thinking they can accomplish all this stuff on their own, and it's about themselves, where literally it cannot be accomplished without the involvement of others. So as you see this picture here, this spider web, I don't know if you can see my cursor there, but as you see that spider web, what do you think the spider has to do to make that web better? What are some things?
Fill
Fix
in the
broken
gaps.
holes.
Mhm.
Fill some gaps. What was another thing someone said?
Fix
Make
some of the
nightly
holes.
repairs.
Okay. We had two people saying something at the same time again, so I missed them both. What were they? Dave?
Make nightly repairs.
Yeah, they have to make constant repairs, right? What would the other person said something?
Oh, just fix holes.
Yeah, you have to fix holes. This network doesn't stay the same unless it has attention given to it. And so I've divided my presentation into, excuse me, into 4 areas. And not everything that I'm going to say today is going to connect with you, but the thing that I want to make sure is that you think about this presentation I'm doing with this picture in your mind. I have a network of relationships. How strong is it? How can I build it? What do I need to do to repair it? All those kinds of things. And I hope you'll listen carefully, and you can put comments and so in the chat. But for yourself, maybe a piece of paper there, or you got a brain that's better than mine. I want you to think about 1 or 2 takeaways you can take from this. Those aha moments when God says something to you that you want to, I don't want to forget this. So the first stage that I want to talk about is embracing delight. There's nothing quite like creating a web of relationships if you do it intentionally. And to do that, I think that healthy interpersonal relationships are built on several key features. The first is trust. You cannot, it's impossible. This is not Stephen Covey, the father. This is Stephen Covey, the son, who wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. He says the key to success in all human relationships is trust. So that's in your family. That's in your network of friendships, and certainly in your business. If you want to be successful, you got to tend to the human relationships. And I think there are 2 words that speak to me when I think about this. The one is integrity. People will not trust you unless what you say and what you do are coherent. You have to constantly thinking, is what I say I'm going to do and what I do they match each other in a high amount? They're coherent. Integrity is fundamental to trust. And the second is consistency. So you can be integrity, you can have integrity in certain moments, but if it's not done consistently over a period of time, there's this underlying lack of trust that develops. So consistent behavior is the underlying key principle for relational trust. And that's what we want to build. I won't go into a lot of it. It's a book if you've never read it, I'd highly encourage you to read it. But he talks about the first step is you have to trust yourself. So the first most important kind of trust you have to build is trust with yourself. So you know that you act with consistency, you speak the same words, and as you trust yourself, build your own self-trust, then you can build healthy trust with other relationships, and then you build trust in your organization, and then beyond that, external to your organization. It's very interesting. But those two elements. So I want to ask you, to what degree do you feel you have integrity in your life, and how consistent is it? That will build healthy relationships. The second thing is good communication practices. And these two are really connected. There's no question about that. But there's a verse that Glenn talks about all the time in his book, and it's in Proverbs 18:21, and it says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." So what you say can create greater health in your network, or it can destroy your network, because it builds relationships or destroys them. And you've maybe experienced that. I have in my life. I remember back when I was in kindergarten, I may have told this story somewhere before, heard it. In kindergarten, I was a little precocious. We were building a windmill out of parts, and we had to bring those things, and my teacher's up at the front going on about how to do this. And I thought, well, I know better than her. I can just put this together myself. I don't need to wait for her. So I did my very best. I never forget, she came back and looked at mine. She said, "Marvin, that's a disaster. And the problem is you didn't pay attention. If you don't learn how to pay attention, you're going to amount to nothing in life." I'll never forget, those words still ring in my head. The power of words, those were destructive to me, but they also energized me. I'm going to pay attention. Haven't always done it well, friends, but the power of life and death is in your tongue. And of course, James goes on and says in chapter 3, verse 8 through 10, the amazing thing is this tongue is hard to tame. And one of the things he says several ways there, with the same tongue, we can bless and curse. We can bless God and curse people. He said, brothers and sisters, that's not the way it should be. So I want you to think about in your connection, as you're building relational connections, how much do you work on blessing rather than cursing? It's so easy to go negative and point out people's failures without actually affirming them, encouraging them. There's huge power. And then another thing you need to think about is these two things, active listening and asking good questions. Do you understand, in active listening, you need to fully engage in all the aspects of the conversation. People that study this say about 17% of communication is in the words you say. Only 17%. We think that's the big deal. 28% is in how you say those words. So the tone of your voice. Right now, you're listening to me and you're judging how much you like this conversation by the tone of my voice, how I speak quickly, slowly, how I elevate, how I drop, all those things. You're reading those things and you have ideas in your mind about what they mean. But get a load of this, 55% of communication is rooted in body language. Body language. Do you think about that when you're building interpersonal relationships in your organization? That communication, so active listening demonstrates all that, because as you listen, then you can ask good questions. But if you're not listening, you can't. And you should primarily ask questions that seek clarity and expose assumptions. Don't ask simple questions, futile questions. Another thing I would encourage you, try not to ask questions that start with the word why. Learn that practice. As you're interacting with people, always use what, how, when, rather than why. Because why creates conflict normally. So think about that. It's very important. Now, it's interesting. These two elements here of active listening and asking good questions, unfortunately, if you are an extrovert leader, you're not good at these normally. And most leaders tend to be extroverted more than introverted, unless you're a pastor in a church. Okay. I can tell you most pastors that I know tend to be introverted, but most leaders of businesses tend to have an extroversion. And what I want to tell you is it's not easy to learn active listening and asking good questions. And here's some of the reasons why extroverts have a hard time with that, because we tend to talk too much. That's our problem. We tend to talk too much. We are verbal processors. So we talk with people while we're making up decisions and so we talk. And you've got people in your team in that network and they're going like, I wish this guy would shut up. Why didn't he think about that before he got in this meeting? He's wasting my time. All those things are reactions to this need for that extroverted leader to keep talking. Here's another thing. We tend to how can I say this? I wrote it down, but I want to say, well, we don't pay attention enough. So we tend to jump from person to person. We're very fun oriented. We engage, we leave. We tend to look over a person's head while we're checking out the other people in the room. All those are bad. These are extroverted things that destroy active listening, so you can ask good questions. And then, of course, we love to share our opinions. By the way, the reason I understand all this is because I'm an extrovert and I have to fight every one of these things in every conversation I have. I have to go into the conversations thinking, don't talk too much, don't overshare opinions, because I have a lot of them and I like to share them. And then I like larger groups than small. A lot of extroverts have a very hard time with one-to-one conversations. Now that's where we and introverts have common ground, because introverts hate one-to-one conversations because they're very nervous and they're insecure. But anyway, just a few thoughts. If you're going to build healthy interpersonal relationships, think about these. You got to build trust, good communication. And here's a little book that I've read numbers of times, was bestseller way back in the 1990s, I think, by Max Dupree, called Leadership is an Art. Good communication means a respect for individuals. So the degree to which you practice good communication tells you, the other people, how much you respect them. I don't think we think about that as we're building networks. One other thing is, as you're building healthy networks, don't forget biblical wisdom and example. Now, I'm talking to Christian leaders here because this is part of the Canadian Christian Business Federation. But some of these principles, if you read literature today in leadership, they borrow from biblical principles. And but here's one. Always remember what it says in Ecclesiastes: two are better than one. You want to have this relationship because two people working on something together are better than one. And then it goes on and says, and actually a threefold cord cannot be quickly broken. So to have two or three people working together in harmony on some project is amazing, to build that strong relationship. But what I want to encourage you is to think about the model of the Trinity. This is a quote out of one of our tools from MentorLink called Passing It On. Just as God's unity, diversity, and harmony are shown through the Trinity, so too can equality and respect within the leadership team be a great witness to God's power. I really want you to think about, there's a theological foundation for developing healthy relationships. It models what the Godhead models for us. You need to think long and hard about that, and I'm short of time, so I got to keep moving. So the first thing is the wonder of creating healthy relationships. What a gift from God to do this. Do you actually think about this? God has given me an ability to build relationships, to build teams, to actually help them grow and develop. Now, the reality is, as we saw in that spider web, you have to really work at it, because they don't stay healthy unless you work at it. So there's a sense in which every team is going through seasons. And I'm just going to leave this thought with you. When you think about your team and the network of relationships on it, think seasons. Are you in a winter season? Are you in a spring season? Are you in a summer season? Are you in a fall season of that relation, of those relationships? Because I think you'd agree with me that every season has blessings and challenges. So you need to think, what kind of season is this network that I'm the leader of or very involved in as a sub leader? What's the season it's experiencing right now? And with that in mind, then how do you sustain it through the various seasons? Well, it'll only be strong if you embrace certain attitudes and actions. And I'll just go through these again fairly quickly, but you need to think, to what degree are our relationships rooted in the example of Jesus? And we have to think about his attitudes. If you read Philippians 2, verses 3 through 8, here we see that we are encouraged by Paul to have the same mind as Christ. So we need, what was Christ's mind like? Because what goes in our mind is actually a reflection of what's in our heart, and it comes out. So what was the mind of Christ? Well, he says it's one mind. In other words, it was about building relationships with people. And then he says, not only have the same mind, but have the same love as Jesus. And that's a real challenge to me, to love people like Jesus loves us. And then he goes on and says, just in case you don't have an idea what I'm talking about, that means no rivalry, no conceit. Instead, we have humility, and we think others are better than ourselves. If you want to build and maintain through the seasons of life, healthy relationships, interpersonal, you have to have the mind of Christ, the attitude of Christ towards others. Actually consider others more significant than yourself. And you all understand, the only way to do that is the way Christ did it, which is leave behind your glorious privileges, which you have because you're the boss and you got the big office and you got the high paycheck and all the benefits and all that. You got to lay that aside and die to yourself. You got to enter into the life of the people you serve. That's what Jesus did, right? He laid aside all the deity rights he had, and he humbled himself, and he took on the form of the people he was going to serve. An unbelievable comment. And then he humbled himself and took on the role of a servant. He wasn't even a normal human being, right? He was a slave. And then he died. And that's, to me, the most fundamental attitude we have to have if we're going to maintain strong interpersonal relationships through all kinds of seasons of life. And then, of course, you see his actions based on those attitudes. He was loving and forgiving. The great commandment there in Luke, love the Lord your God with all your heart and love others as you love yourself. Do you wake up every morning saying, this is the call in my life, to love God completely and to love others as Christ loved me? I'll be honest with you, there are many days I got up and I just dove into the responsibilities I had without thinking that what I'm going to do impacts other people. There's a network of relationships, and I better model loving God. And that's the only way to make it go. So, and then in case you wonder what that loving God and loving others is like, he tells a story of the Good Samaritan, which is mind-blowing. But anyway, we'll move on. So first of all, if you're going to keep the relationship strong through all the seasons, rooted in the example of Jesus, but then rejoice and grieve. I've been around lots of different organizations. Some I've led and some I've been part of. I worked for a while before I came back to Canada in a school, college, seminary that had probably 150 to 200 employees, 4,000 students. You know, and I learned back then, I watched it. And then, of course, to a greater or lesser degree, I tried to practice this when I led a church that had a Christian school. So we had a staff of about 14 or 15. Then when I was at Heritage, we had a staff around 60 full and part-time people. It's unbelievable to me, guys, men and women, but we aren't much better at rejoicing than we are at grieving. But I can tell you, if it's one of the two, we're way worse at grieving than we are at rejoicing. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to build healthy relationships, learn how to rejoice together in appropriate ways, but learn how to grieve together. Because when you lose something, you have to grieve the loss. I've been in organizations when we had significant people that chose to leave, left a big hole. And you know, it was like, okay, clap your hands. God bless, we're moving on. Never took time to grieve that loss. How did that impact our relational network as a community of faith or as a group working together on a project or in the business where I was? We didn't even grieve it. Or sometimes we'd have a contract we were working on. I remember some projects we worked on for months, only to have the accreditation body kill it. How do you grieve that loss? You have to spend time together talking about it, encouraging people to share their feelings about it. And then, of course, become an expert at rejoicing. Celebrate successes, individual successes, group successes. Have parties. Make sure people realize that this is a community of hope and life. And so that's the second thing I want to say. And then the third thing, so celebrate successes and learn how to grieve losses. But the third thing is build regular personal interaction into your interpersonal relationships. I've had the privilege of mentoring many younger people in ministry. And that was both when I was a Heritage and since. You know what the number one complaint is of young people going out for their first role as an associate? Almost always they say, had a meeting with the lead pastor, he told me what me to do, and then he doesn't want to see me again. Well, how often do you get together? Almost never. Only if I beat down his door and, okay, what do you want? And then it's very perfunctory. I can hardly imagine that, but I've heard it so many times. I know it's got to be true. These guys aren't making this up. Design in your network regular interpersonal relationships, interaction, and that's on two levels. You have to do it as a group and you have to do it as an individual. So how do you develop good quality meetings in your network that build the team? There's an interesting book written, Death by Meetings, by oh, good night. The name just went on my mind. Help me out. There you go. You got to read that. Most meetings I've been in, well, never the ones that I led, of course, you know that. I'm just kidding. But I've been in so many meetings when it was death, like it was not building, it was not interesting. So build a culture of life and hope and connectedness when you have your group and team meetings. And that means you have to keep reviewing your vision, your values, what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, reminding all those people how crucial they are to the accomplishment. Okay. And fundamentally, don't forget this, pray together. Now, if you're in a totally non-Christian environment, I think you'd have to do that with very great care. But some of you work in environments to the degree you could pray together. It's really critical. And then as individuals, set up a system where you interact with the individuals that directly report to you. And, you know, I've had that experience when it's been a few and it's been many. Try never to get too many. I guess the going rate should be not much more than 7. But ask them how they would like to have interaction with you. As a leader, ask them. Don't tell them we're going to meet once a week. I remember when I was a Heritage and I finally learned that out. There's some didn't want to see me every week. We didn't need to see each other every week. We need to see each other regularly, but we both had to agree how much, how often, and what context, and so on. And then when you have that meeting, but I encourage you, don't just dive into the work and the projects and how are they doing. Talk about them as whole people. How are you doing? Are you healthy? How's your marriage? What are your kids doing? Learn their names, learn the kids' names. Make this a very active interpersonal connection. Well, Don, I got to keep moving on here. So then here's the sad reality. Sometimes there's conflict in the web, there's tears, there's breakdowns. And whenever you get involved in that, you're entering danger zone. You got to do this carefully. And so I just want to give you a few thoughts on how you restore a web after conflict or during conflict. So every web is fragile and easily broken. Don't forget that. But the goal needs to be reconciliation and restoration. Unfortunately, in many teams, the goal is to get rid of people that are problematic. The people that are causing the break, the people that are causing the conflict, get rid of them. But I think the goal should always try very hard for reconciliation and restoration. So to do that, you have to develop some clear organizational values about people. You all know this, but I just want to remind you, every person is valuable. Every person, whether you're leading a Christian or a non-Christian, a Christian or non-Christian organization, remember, every person you're dealing with is created by God. They are important. They are special. God designed them to do something on planet Earth. And that design is wrapped up, as we see in Romans 12, in the gifts and experiences. But Do you recognize that, people? And it's interesting, in Romans 12, Paul says, don't think too highly of yourself. Don't think too highly. Instead, think soberly. Remember, these are valuable people. And while they may have a messed up life and they may be having struggles, God still values them. So be careful how you handle people. And I know what I'm talking about. I've been the end of someone thinking I wasn't valuable, and I think at times I've treated people that way, and it's so damaging. So remember, start there. And then second, make sure the value in your organization is that ongoing conflict is not an option. There is such a thing as some healthy conflict if it's to find a better answer, but that's not so much conflict. That might be difference of opinion, but it can't be ongoing. That's not an option. And there's all kinds of thoughts in that passage in Ephesians. But here's what creates conflict. And unless you deal with it, it's things like, and he lists them: bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, slander, and malice. Those are the things that create conflict. And you think about those words, and I'm telling you, conflict. You'll bring back memories of things you've experienced. Instead, he says, be kind, tenderhearted, forgiving. So this is, we will not tolerate ongoing conflict. In our organization, we're going to work on it. That's number one. Secondly, as you deal with it, operate with some biblical principles. So here's one that's very clear, that's almost never practiced well. When you have a conflict between two people, or you have a conflict with someone, the tendency is to go and talk to someone else about it before you talk to the person with whom you're having the conflict. And as soon as you do that, you destroy the possibility of a good result. Because someone gets back to them. Oh yeah, the boss came and talked to me about you. So don't triangulate. In other words, here's my person that I have a problem with, and I go and talk to someone else instead of that person and try and resolve it. I build a triangle, and it's dangerous. And it's always deadly. Instead, according to Matthew, you go to the person first, privately, quietly, seek if you can restore the relationship. If not, then you bring some others carefully in. And eventually, if you cannot bring restoration, then there has to be a more public dealing with it. But those first two steps are not public. How do you handle that? And then he says, restore by mature people. Sometimes we need to be more mature. So as we get into the restoration process, we act with maturity. But that's what Galatians says. Those of you who are mature, restore. Get involved. Bring restoration if at all possible. But to enter into this danger zone of the plan, and there's a book that I've read that I really enjoyed called When to Take a Risk. I forgot to list that at the end. When to Take a Risk by Terry Muck. Problem is it's out of print. You can't find it unless you go to some old used bookstore. But in that book, he talks about two great dangers in decisions you have to make as a leader. One is to get involved between two people that are warring with each other, and the other is you personally having a problem with someone else and have to restore it. Those are two. We've talked about the one. So when you're resolving interpersonal conflict, your goal is to be a peacemaker, to find the win-win solution. And the only way that can work is if both people will enter into forgiveness to each other. Both have to extend forgiveness. So you try to bring people together, help understand what caused it. How can we resolve it? So both of you feel like there's a win, but it involves forgiveness. I was just talking to a Christian leader that runs a large mission organization. And we're trying to set up a coffee time. He just said to me, this just happened. He said, Marv, my heart is so broken. He said, I just had to engage two of my senior leaders who were having a major conflict. We've spent hours trying to resolve it. And I just got the resignation letter from the one. And then he said, I guess sometimes it's like Paul and Barnabas, you just can't work it out. Well, that may be true. And in his case, it may be true. but do everything in your power not to make that true. Amen. Do everything not to make that true. So you need to go in lovingly, carefully, thoughtfully, looking for that win-win situation. I can remember one time it happened to me at Heritage. Blew up right in front of us on our senior leadership team. Two guys started yelling at each other. Totally shocked me. And honestly, that was one of the great tests of my leadership. The one guy that started it, I found him another job, lovingly, carefully. And the other person, I tested what the accusation was, found it actually was somewhat true, and gave him opportunities to improve, but in the end he didn't, so we had to let him go. But it wasn't done quickly, it wasn't done arbitrarily, it was done carefully, thoughtfully. We did everything we could to resolve it. So this is really important. And then resolving personal conflict, try to be a healer, be humble, deny self. Humility is the motivation. So your web will have trouble, but you as a leader are the key to restoring, reconciling, and rebuilding. And then the last thought was extend leadership. I don't know how many of you attend one of the breakfasts that Canadian Christian Business Federation does, but in those breakfasts, we do topics like these. And the topic for this month, Don, I think, is interpersonal relationships. So I picked this up from one of the subtopics in that. And that is, if you're going to build a strong web, you got to extend your leadership. You got to reproduce yourself through mentoring. So just a few thoughts and then we're done. Embrace younger leaders as valued members of the web. I can tell you that this is not done easily and it's not done often. I already told you about the experience I've had with many younger leaders. The reason is because younger people don't operate the way you do. They see things differently. And so what happens is they tend to create conflict. You think they're a problem. They may be really good for your organization. So you got to value them, listen to them, be careful. So invest wisely. As you've only got a small amount of time to do this. So invest very wisely. Select someone that you're going to mentor, that you're going to build to be a strong leader in your organization. Select on the basis of character and capacity. That's what 2 Timothy tells you. Character, faithfulness. That's a character quality. Has a lot of ramifications to it. And then someone that can do what you're doing with that person with someone else. So you multiply. It's not just addition. Select carefully. And when you're working with the person as a valued member in a mentoring relationship, I want to tell you, focus on the heart, not just the hands and the head. Most mentoring is a focus on hands, that's skills, and knowledge, head, because that helps the organization to go forward quickly. But the problem is the heart needs to be dealt with. As someone as well said, we hire on the basis of skills and experience, and we fire on the basis of character. That's the problem. The heart, the attitudes, the motives, the character. Spend time on that. And then plan your succession carefully. Don't rush it. Allow younger leaders to try. So you got to bring people along, let them try. They can fail. That's learned experience. And then develop a thoughtful work plan and work it through. And right now I'm having the joy of, I think, probably working with 6 different people that are getting to transition, succession stage, and it's just fun. Put a plan and work it. Reproduce your web through mentoring. So I asked you at the start, what are some takeaways? 1 or 2 ideas that captured your attention. Maybe just take a moment and write them down. I'll give you a moment to do that while I check what's in the chat box. And then the second, based on those ideas, what are 1 or 2 actions you can take in the next 90 days that will make a significant difference in your relational network? What might they be? And here's a list of the books that I mentioned. So why don't you just take a minute to write something down? I'm going to look at this chat box and then we'll open up for questions. Okay. David Barker says, PDA should not be allowed at meetings. I'm just brain dead. What's a PDA here? Professional development. What is that? What is assignment?
Personal data assistant, your cell phone, your smartphone.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because he talks about people go into a meeting and they're all sitting around staring at their cell phone before the meeting starts, and nobody's actually engaging and talking to each other. So you can't build relationships if everybody's only has a relationship with their phone. So
Yeah, no, that's a good comment, and thanks for bringing it up. And sometimes you just have to have them all, put them in a basket by the door of the room, so Anthony Goodhoof writes, interesting that as I get older and into retirement, I'm more focused on quality than quantity in my relational web. Great comment. The quality focus is driven by business reach, while now I'm more interested in closer and more meaningful connections. Great comments. All right. So here's some other things. You can read them. Isn't healthy debate and difference a valuable tool? Yes, it is. I said that's healthy, but when it's ongoing conflict, that's not healthy. Yeah. Okay. Tracy says, what can you suggest how to engage in danger if we allow time with a peer at the same level as me? Where to start? Okay. I think my simple answer, Tracy, is probably not helpful to you at this moment because there's something deeper going on in your question here. But my comment is, I think you have to start off by listening carefully, having a very healthy conversation to find out what the situation is. And listening carefully and asking good questions before you get into the conversation. You have to allow time. Spend some time. Where to start? That's all I can say. Don, maybe you want to take it, the question and answer time?
Let's just open it up for questions and answers. And maybe, I'm not suggesting necessarily that Marv has all the answers, because I'm sure with a group this size, we've got many great ideas and insights. So if you'd like to raise a question and Marv may answer it, or maybe someone else wants to answer it, even this one from Tracy. So let's just we've got about 15 minutes left, so we'd be happy to use that time to explore some of the subjects here. Marv, you've done an excellent job here. I really appreciate all of the excellent content and ideas you put together, some real practical illustrations. So now let's just have an opportunity to listen and learn from each other and to ask those questions that hopefully will bring out even more.
Well, if I can ask a question, I think something that's kind of been burning in me right from the beginning. It's just just in my own story. How about how working in private sector where I've been pretty deliberate to be invested in those I work with, those that support me, and being disappointed when those leaders above me aren't available as I would like to find anyway. And I know there's differences in personality and chemistry, and there's a lot of different factors at play. But like your example, I think when I first started my current role, Monday morning I'd go in and bounce off my boss, my partner. This was like, oh, great bomber game, and he goes, yep, great. And then he's got his eyes on the screen and says, keep going, I'm listening. No, he's not listening. He doesn't want me there. I'm like, okay, like a fine, I'll talk to you a different time. But that's just, and that happens, would happen very infrequently. So just, so I guess maybe it's a matter of how do we express to those who are superior to us when we would like our relationship to be more, but then they're probably focused on performance rather than relationship.
And I think I heard what you're saying, James. It was a little tough to hear it all, but you feel diminished in some way. You feel put down because there's not an engagement that goes on, right? He's staring at his screen. You're trying to have a conversation. My comment that I've learned over the years is when situations like that arise, often ask for permission to say something. So it's happening, I would say, and whatever his name is, Mr. Boss, could I just say something here? And if he doesn't give you the permission, then do it another time. If not now, when could we have a conversation? And in that conversation, say how you feel about what's happening. when I just want to come in and have a brief conversation with you at the start of the week, and you're sitting and looking at your screen, I really feel diminished as a person. I feel like I have no value. I think unless you, now the temptation will be just to dive bomb on them and say something. Ask for permission to say it. And I think that's healthier in building the relationship that you're hoping you could have. Is that helpful at all, James?
I like it as a step because it's, at least in the moment, draw some attention to this and not, that we actually talk or find a better time to connect.
Yeah. Give them the opportunity. If they say, well, I can't right now, then, well, when could we have that conversation? I just, there's something I'd like to say, but I want to have permission to do it. Anyway, I'll just leave it at that. Others can jump in and give their wisdom on this, but what happens to you in that, don't ever do to others. Okay. That's the main thing I want to say. Learn from that bad interaction, how in your network, you don't treat people like that.
Yeah, Marv, I guess my experience has been that corporate leaders, they've got the vision and they really focus on executing that vision and then being accountable. There's not a lot of time for debate sometimes. Like my clients, man, it's hustle, go. They're on planes. They're, it's tough. It's a real tough challenge to talk to people, to take the time and sort things out. And yeah, it's a great goal. I guess my experience just been really tough to connect with people and get their attention in the corporate world.
You've got way more experience on that, Anthony, than I do. And but I like I say, I've been around busy people too, maybe not in the corporate world like you have, but I've been around busy people, like I told you, leading major universities. And I still believe that the way is to think as clearly as you can when might be the very best time to have the conversation and ask for permission. Could we have a conversation? Now, if it's just a business deal, that's different. I mean, they probably don't want to build a relationship with you, but I'm talking about when you want to have a healthy relationship with a person or in the network. So if it's a corporate deal where you're just trying to get their attention so you can sell your product or service to someone, I don't know that they even care about relationship. And that's sad. That is really sad, but it's so true. But if you think that that's important, then I think I'd study that person. I know you take coffee every day at this time. Would it be possible we could have a conversation during your coffee time? Or, okay, does that helpful at all? You study them and then ask for permission. But it all depends on how important that relational network is to you, or that relational interaction is to you.
Marv, that's great advice. And I would add as well the third part of that, which is give them grace when they try. Because I spent 32 years at a large financial institution and last half of it in management. And a lot of senior managers have no idea how to have personal conversations. It's not something they're trained on. It's not something they do a lot, so they're not very comfortable with. So when you ask for that, it may be very, very new for them and they're dealing in an area that they're not very comfortable with or very experienced. So give them the grace to that they're trying and try and help them along. Don't just shake their head and say, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Give them the opportunity to encourage them along. Say, well, that's really great advice. What else would you have? What else might you suggest? Or, and that sort of thing, and just kind of help them along, because you kind of have to take control of that scenario. Because a lot of times, frankly, it's in all my years in management, we weren't trained on having those conversations a whole lot. So it is something to keep in mind. So as well as the other thing is asking permission and then engaging them and identifying and learning more about them, but also give them grace when they try.
Well, great comments. I'm going to ask a question, Don, and no one has to answer this. And how many of you would say right now there's some situation in a relational network that you're part of that needs attention? How many would say? It could be in your family, could be your extended family, could be your business, could be your church. How many would say, there's something there's an area I could see needs improvement in our relational network. I hope that you'll take what I said, just maybe one or two ideas, and say, this is where I'm going to move in that direction. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to do something, and not just let it sit. Because what I've learned over the years, my friends, is when you have challenges, difficulties, or brokenness, especially brokenness in important relational networks, it weighs you down, and you can hardly function well in the other areas of your life because that's always there. And so take some step.
Well, that was also in agreement to what Marvin was saying. Yes, there is somebody I do have, but did want to comment as well. It's always important to be cognizant of what is the comfort level of the person that you do have to have that important discussion with. So not just what is a comfortable time for them, but do we want to meet in your office, my office, a public place, on offsite. And also have to be understanding, what their communication is, how they best communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is an email. Maybe it, start with an email and then we do a private conversation. So, because everybody's sensitive, and especially if it's somebody who is a report to us, we do want to be making sure that they're comfortable to be able to share what they need to share, so we can get out from them what we need to hear as well.
So that's good advice, Ken. Thanks.
All good advice. And that's kind of what I meant, Ken, when I say study the situation. It's more than just studying when can we meet. It's get to know that person well. And I love that idea. I've learned over the years, it's best to try and find neutral territory. So it's not in his office or my office. It's some neutral ground where they can feel comfortable. But if you can't, then where they feel that they have the most power. Another question, Don, I was just going to ask everybody. I don't want to miss the last part about building the network through mentoring. And just want to drop that in everybody's head, that I hope you're prayerfully thinking, who is someone in my present network that I could invest in a way that someday could take my role over, or could be a senior leader in some other organization or something. This is a missing ingredient in many of our lives. And I just want to encourage you to think about that. Again, it starts with a conversation with the person. It needs to be intentional, somewhat structured, but don't forget the character side. Anyway, I just want to throw that. It's part of my passion, so forgive me. And I just see so many organizations not spending that kind of, they'll mentor people, but it's only for their benefit, not for the person's benefit, really.
Thanks, Marv. Our time is virtually up, so we should wrap it up. But I just want to thank you once again for an excellent presentation. And I see Dave there clapping his hands. I'm sure we'd all do the same if we're in your presence. But no, we really appreciate the investment you've made in our lives and in the lives of those that we influence because of what you shared with us today. So just before we close, I do want to mention that next month's topic, biblical leadership principle, is all around obedience to God. We have an interesting person who's going to be sharing on that. Jen Paul is the president of Digital Consultants in Toronto, works with the big banks, and she's also happens to be a board member for the Canadian Christian Business Federation. And so Jen is going to be speaking to us next month. I think you'll find it fascinating as to her perspective and her experience. And so that is on February the 15th. The third Wednesday of every month is the date that we choose to feature these business leadership discussions. So thanks for your attendance. Why don't we just have a closing word of prayer? Father, we thank you so much for these insights that Marv has shared, and we thank you for the truth that has emerged from your word. Lord, I pray that we would reflect on not only this presentation, but also the truth of your word, and that we would realize the importance and significance that you place on relationships with us as your people, and that you want us to place on others around us. And so, Lord, I pray that we might have taken an insight or two today and thought through a relationship or two that we need to deal with. I pray that you'll give us wisdom insight, and commitment to follow through and to see a difference come about because of what we've shared today. And so we thank you for each person on this call. Pray your blessing over them in this new year. Praying that we look forward to next month, that we'll rendezvous and be able to once again focus on what's important and close to your heart. For it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
God bless you all. Take care.
Thank you, everyone, for spending time with me. It's been a great joy. God bless you all.